There's my little kitchen partner, Benjamin. Today we're going to make sauerkraut. So what we did is we took a cabbage. We're growing some in the garden yet, but we're only 2 weeks in, so it's going to be a couple weeks before we can actually have our own cabbages. But we ordered some stuff. This here's a cabbage cutter. Now, some people just use a regular knife. Other people use what's called a mandolin, which is similar to a cabbage cutter, but smaller. And it's more universal for other fruits and vegetables and things like that nature. So this here, basically a giant mandolin made especially for cabbage. It's called a cabbage cutter. We just needed a big bowl. So what we did is took a wok. That's what we had. There's some of the cabbage we cut up. So we took a full cabbage. We cut it in half. So if that was the full cabbage here, you cut it in half all the way down. And then you would put half it here and half here, and then you would cut that one in half and that in half. So you got 4 quarters. Then you're going to take this one here. You're going to cut the inside right there, the core out. Right there, you're going to cut that out. This is good for other things, but it's not really good for sauerkraut. We're just going to cut that part there out. And then we're going to save this here in another bowl. That's going to go to our pigs. Okay, now I'm going to step over here. So once it's in that shape there, I'm just going to set it in here. This here will eventually be able to go down far enough. But in the very beginning, just kind of use my hand. So you got to hold on pretty tight here so it doesn't come sliding. And this thing here is super sharp, so you want to make sure your fingers are only on the cabbage long enough to go down a little bit until you can get this here in there. And the cabbage slices up pretty quick, so just be really careful because I don't want anybody getting hurt. You're just going to run that there, like that, back and forth. And once it's on good, push that down a little bit. That bowl kind of slips out. When it gets down, very carefully just pull that out. This part here you can pull back and just slide that out. Some stuck under it. Just kind of slide that on down in. Okay, now for the actual cabbage part with the salt, you're going to use about a teaspoon and a half per pound of cabbage. So what you're going to do, go ahead and step back then. So this is a crock pot, or a crock. So if you can see in there, that's where the cabbage is going to go. So we're going to put the cabbage in here. Then we're going to sprinkle a little bit of salt. Now once that's in there, we got some weights over here. So we're going to put these weights down and then in. And that's going to keep the cabbage below the water line. So right now we're just going to start taking the cabbage. Now if you notice, we're not adding water or anything. There's nothing inside here. All this here is just cabbage that has been cut on the cutter. Put that in there. And there's definitely a lot of different ways you can do this. I've seen some people, they put it directly into a ball jar or mason jar. You know, they can add like apples and other things as well. Our family, to my knowledge, all they ever did was just the cabbage and either the canning salt or sea salt works as well. And then they used to put a piece of wood on there and then a brick to hold it down. So once you get all that liquid and that water, or basically salt water is what it is, saline solution, then you're going to want the cabbage below that line. If it's above it, it actually gets kind of slimy during the fermentation process. Then you'd have to take that part off and get rid of. So we got the cabbage in here. Now we're going to head and go grab some salt. Now that cabbage is supposedly 2 pounds, so we need 3 teaspoons of salt. So grab that. Alright, let's 1 teaspoon. And you want to put a little bit in at a time. You never want to put it all in at one time. So I'm just going to put a little bit over 1 teaspoon. Sprinkle that in there. Pause it for a second. So this here is a wooden stomper. Fermentaholics. We got this here on the website. Works really good though. So you're just going to put the salt in there. And then you're just going to kind of push and turn. So if you look, before I started stomping, this was halfway, almost 3/4 the way up. This here is just going to keep on going down. Alright, then once we get that smashed down a little bit, I'm going to take the second, put that in there, and then keep working that in here. Like I said, you're just kind of pushing down and around. Alright, we're going to let that sit. If you notice here, my hands are starting to get really, really wet. That's starting to get really liquidy. Like I said, we haven't added any water at all, but you're going to start getting water coming up to the top. Go ahead and pause it. Alright, still smashing it up good. See, just kind of push and turn and kind of rotate. It's starting to get pretty watery now. Alright, then I want to put in my last thing, is a teaspoon of salt. On the salt too, I think a lot of it is preference. It's all used for the fermenting process. You know, different people say different things though. Some will say 1.5 teaspoons, some will say 4. We always try to do like 1.5 to 2. But it's up to your preference. Just start off small, do a small batch, you know. We usually check ours about every 4 to 5 days. And then usually after about 2 weeks, you can actually eat it. If you look down in there, it's starting to get really liquidy. It's already looking like coleslaw. Real wet. I'm just going to push. The salt is what draws out all that liquid. So, especially if it's right out of your garden, you're going to have a lot more water in your cabbage. And And this is going to work a lot better than the store-bought. Like I said, this is a store-bought one. And then a lot of people also will take water and add it to their cabbage. So this is the second cabbage. I'm pulling the outer leaves off. Now the old timers, or my grandparents, great grandparents, they would actually save this. Once you got to this point here, go ahead and video down inside. Once you got to this point here, they would pack those leaves down inside, and that would help leave all the sauerkraut underneath the water level. Nowadays we use weights. Some people still use this way here though, but you always want to pull off the outer layer because this doesn't make good sauerkraut. There's usually, if there's anything bad about it, that would be the section it's in. Like I said, if you did want to have the weights, you don't want to buy the weights, or you have an antique or an older one that doesn't come with the weights, you can always use the leaves. So we're going to go ahead and cut this one here in half and then quarters. So be careful. Earlier a knife slipped and it tickled a little bit, so let's try not to do that one again. So we're going to cut it in half. Cut it one more time in half, which makes it a quarter. Same thing over here. Then once you get to this point here, the core, this little center section right there, you're going to cut out. There's other uses as well. You can look up online. Some people do use the core. It's just not really good for sauerkraut. Me personally, we're actually just going to save it for the pigs. So we're just cut all the core out. And then once the, see, this one here's still a little bit left. Just the way we kind of cut it in there. Alright, and then once that, we're just going to go ahead and use the cabbage cutter again. We'll get everything sliced up, we'll put it in here. And then I'm not going to put any more salt in there. And then we'll just push it down and see where we're at. So we'll be back in just a minute. Alright. Cut up the last of that cabbage. Push that in there. Might have to put a little bit more salt in there. I think the second cabbage actually weighed a little bit more than we thought. Like I said, for about every pound, good rule of thumb is about a teaspoon and a half to 2 teaspoons of salt. And once you get down there, I use this in the beginning, and then once I start getting it really good, I just kind of start using my hand. Just find it easier, and just kind of push and turn. And you're just going to mix it in there. And what you're doing is you're just breaking it up. See, so I'm pushing down, and then I'm just kind of moving my hand like that. It's breaking down. If you notice how wetted it's getting now, that's from the salt actually pulling all the water out of the cabbage. So let's go ahead and add another teaspoon for good measure. Just kind of mix it in there. The other thing with cabbage, you can put it in your house, but the stuff does stink. I know, like, it depends on, know how good your nose is and everything, but I would highly recommend putting this in your basement. You do want it in a cool place though, that's dark. That's a good way everybody uses these Crocs. But about 60 to 75 degrees. The warmer it is, the faster it's going to ferment. If you go ahead and look in there for a second, Ben, you can see the water is at the top. Let me rinse my hands off real quick. So all that water in there is from the salt pulling that out of the cabbage. Then I'm going to rinse the weights off real quick. So these are the weights here. So you're going to put it at an angle and set it to the side. You just want to kind of go in there. Any cabbage that's not down in that water isn't going to really turn the sauerkraut. So you just kind of make sure you put your fingers in there and go all the way around the sides. Pull all that down and then get both weights in there. Go ahead and shine back down there. So if you notice now all the cabbage is below the water line, that's exactly like you want. Now, like I said, if you don't have the weights, some people will do different things. I've seen people, you take a big like sandwich bags, like the big freezer sandwich bags. You put water in there, and then you can kind of push it in and out, and that'll kind of spread out once it gets in there. Like I said, my grandparents, great-grandparents, they used a piece of wood. They didn't have this lip on theirs. You know, theirs was just here all the way around. And they cut out a piece of wood and put a brick on it years ago. This one here has actually got a lip. So once all that's ready to go, I take the lid, I put the lid on there. I'm going to fill this here up with water at the top, and that's going to put a seal on it. Then I'm going to put that in my basement in the dark for 2 weeks, bare minimum. I would check on it every 4 to 5 days, and then just after 2 weeks, go ahead and try it and see if you like it. This is kind of similar to kimchi though, and you could leave it down there for a couple years if you really wanted to. I wouldn't advise it, but I mean, you could definitely do it. But yeah, just I hope you guys try it with your family, and I hope you enjoy it, and God bless. Thank you.